Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about a point that gets missed with a lot of people when they start asking about assistance work and accessory work. And if you guys look at some of the lifts that I do and you look at my general training, it will become apparent to a lot of people that most of your accessory work and assistance work as a power lifter or strength athlete is just going to look like basically a bodybuilding or a moderate volume hypertrophy program. And that's the best way to think about it. That's the best way to think about that sort of training, because what is it that we're trying to do with our supplemental lifts? We're trying to add muscle in all the right places. We're trying to get stacked, because a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. And we don't have to worry about all of our performance elements with these movements, right? I mean, do you really care about your incline bench or your skull crushers having max strength or speed strength or any of that stuff? Of course not. We're doing them to get thicker. We're doing them to get stacked. And normally you might even periodize hypertrophy type training into different phases and things like that. But when you're doing it as purely accessory work, that's not necessary, because you are basically periodizing your main work. You're periodizing your main work. And for people who don't understand what I mean, let's take examples of what I do on my 2 bench press days every week. And this really highlights it, because it almost looks like some gym bro training, or what some people would call power building training, if you look at what I specifically do. So I have max effort and dynamic effort days for bench press, right? That's my bench programming. That's what we do with the bench press. And then afterwards, I do supplemental lifts. Well, a lot of times it involves stuff like doing incline bench, floor presses, side laterals, skull crushers. Well, a lot of people wouldn't think of that as powerlifting. So let's say I do, after my benching, I do a 5x5 on some sort of auxiliary press. It could be an incline bench. Well, a lot of people would think of that as bodybuilding, right? A 5x5 incline bench. We're getting into real hypertrophy type training with a slight strength base to it. 5x5 floor press, 5x5 weighted dips, something like that. Or it could be 6 sets of 6 or 4 sets of 8. But something that puts you into that general hypertrophy range with still a moderately heavy weight using moderate volumes. And so a lot of people would think of it that. No, I'm not saying the hypertrophy range is real, but I'm saying that that is what you are treating it as, because we don't care about maximizing strength on these lifts. It's not necessary. So we're treating them the same way we might write, say, an intermediate hypertrophy program. That's really what it looks like, because you'll see that with a secondary press. And then what else do I do behind it? I mean, obviously we do bicep work and stuff like that in rows, but let's just look at the muscles involved with the benching. You got pecs, you got delts, you got triceps. Pretty straightforward. So we're doing a press with, say, something like 5 sets of 5 or 4 sets of 8. It's going to work the pecs, the front delts, the triceps, all of that, but in a manner that's different than our flat bench. And again, picking exercises that are known for their muscle stimulation and hypertrophy benefits. I mean, incline bench, longer range of motion with a deeper stretch than the bench press. Floor press, we remove leg drive. So you do stuff like that, and then we look at the smaller movements. What am I doing these days? I don't know, around 3 sets of 8 to 10 with tricep extensions, with side lateral raises. Well, if a person were doing a chest, shoulder, and tricep workout, isn't that the sort of thing you would expect for, say, an intermediate who's on a moderate volume? They're not pushing a real high volume program. If they were just pushing like a power building type program, which is a term people like to use, isn't that the sort of thing you would do? You might do that 2 or 3 times a week, but look, a 5x5 on a heavy chest press, followed by 3 sets of 8 to 10 on a tricep extension and a lateral raise. When you start looking at the volumes there, we're on the very, very low end of the hypertrophy spectrum in training volume. We're right there at the minimum threshold for something like that for someone to put on size. Now, if you were to take an intermediate lifter and you were to run them on some slow progression on, a 5x5 incline bench or floor press, or even, like I said, 4x8, then you follow it up with 3 sets of pretty much to failure with a tricep extension and a side lateral raise, and you did that a couple times a week, wouldn't we think of that as a moderate volume bodybuilder type program for those muscles? And could it say an intermediate type lifter would grow off of that decently well, wouldn't they? If they just did that twice a week and they skipped the actual powerlifting training, all the benching periodization, they'd grow off that. Of course they would. So isn't that what we're doing? When you look at a lot of your programming for traditional powerlifting programs, or whether it's conjugate or other things, a lot of times that's what we're doing. We're doing our classic lifts and whatever sort of programming that we're working with. We're not doing them for always a lot of volume, are we? In some cases we are with speed work, but they're really being treated as very, very low rep exercises. Whether it's heavy singles, heavy triples, speed work, treating your classic lifts like that. And then afterwards, you're basically running what people would oftentimes call a bodybuilding program. Now, it's not going to be a body part split type bodybuilding program, but the sort of stuff that we would put a late novice or an intermediate on who wanted to get thick, who didn't have, say, powerlifting goals. We might put them on a program like that. So that's what we're doing. We're coming in behind our big lifts and doing auxiliary work that's there to just make you thicker. It's to make you stacked. We're not doing it for the specific performance elements, because in my case, I already have max effort work. I already have dynamic effort work. I already have all my band work and chain work and all of this other stuff on my big lifts. So what we're doing is we're coming behind it and we're thickening up the muscles that we need, the muscles that we realize might not be getting quite the work that we want to maximize their size. Because a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. And it's not to say we aren't getting some hypertrophy from the actual power training. Can you grow off of training maxes? Absolutely. Anyone who says you can't is full of it. Of course you can. It's going to be a painfully slow process once you've reached any level of strength base, though. Can we grow off the speed work? You bet you can. You could probably have people do nothing but 2 or 3 dynamic effort workouts every week, and they would grow off of it. It's not going to be maximum growth stimulation, but they're going to grow off of it. So what is it we're doing with stuff like this? We're supplementing that work with work that is a bit more hypertrophy specific, and not necessarily hypertrophy in the traditional rep range, but hypertrophy volumes. Coming in and ensuring that all the muscles involved, whether it's the primary muscles, the primary movers, the support musculature, is getting enough stimulation that everything is growing maximally. Because that's a misconception people have about people who are training for maximum strength versus, say, bodybuilding purposes. I'd argue that the training in this manner is actually maximum hypertrophy. Bodybuilding per se is not, because you have to look at proportions. A bodybuilder would actually back off training their quads and their chest if their hamstrings and lats needed more work. They would grow slower in those areas, whereas a strength athlete just wants to get as stacked as possible everywhere that he needs to grow. We're generally trying to maximize hypertrophy with a bias towards the muscles that we know will make us the strongest on our bigger lifts. But we are trying to maximize hypertrophy, and we don't necessarily quit training something or back off training something just because it's disproportionate. But when you are training for maximum strength, it's not just about specificity of training in the sense of you're training your main list for maximum strength. You'd be training variations of them for maximum strength and other things, but you are going to do a significant amount of training volume for everything in your body. Because again, every coach knows this from decades of observing lifters. Every study that's looked at it knows this. the more stacked you can get in terms of just general size and all the primary movers, the stronger you're going to be. Maximum strength doesn't always carry over to maximum hypertrophy, but when you combine maximum strength training with maximum hypertrophy, you do get maximum strength. So that's what's going on with assistance work. We're just trying to make everything thick. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.